What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we got a package in from Tune Plus. We got some Brisk Racing silver spark plugs here. The only thing I'm a little bit confused about is these spark plugs say they came from somewhere in Michigan, and somewhere in Michigan is some city that I cannot pronounce. It's Wyandotte, Wyandotte. I'm not sure how to say it. From my understanding, Tune Plus is in Louisville, Texas, so there must be another facility or something out there in Michigan. These are pre-gapped to Tune Plus specs. Let's go ahead and open them and check them out. So here's the spark plugs from Brisk Racing. There's 4 of them, obviously. There's no other information in the packaging, so, I mean, they say they come pre-gapped, so I'm assuming that's the case. But we'll check it out in the morning when I go to install them. Alright, so I'm back. We're going to finally get to wrench on the EcoBoost Mustang. It's been raining a lot lately. It's been raining today too, but it hasn't been too bad. So luckily I'm under a carport, so I shouldn't have to worry too much about getting wet. So the way the video is going to be structured is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to show you what tools you need for the installation process. Then we're going to go over the actual installation process. And then after that, I'm going to have a little bit of a discussion discussing the installation process, why I decided to change out my spark plugs, and how these new spark plugs perform. So if you're just here for the installation process, thank you so much for watching, and let's get to it. So I just finished the installation, luckily just in time because it did start raining outside, so we're bringing the video inside. But let's go ahead and discuss what tools that you're going to need for the installation. First up, you're going to need a 5/8 spark plug socket. I don't know if you can see it on the inside, you probably can't, but it has a magnet on the inside. This becomes useful when you're going to remove the spark plug and put the spark plug down into the bore. That way the spark plug won't fall out of the socket and potentially change the gap or cause damage. You will also need an extension, a pretty long one. You probably don't need one this long, but it will help you and will make it easier to remove those spark plugs from their threads. And of course, to use this setup, you're going to need a ratchet as well that will fit the connection, just like so. And this will be your main setup to remove and install the spark plugs. You're also going to need an 8mm and 10mm deep socket. This will be used to remove the battery terminals from the battery, as well as remove the engine cover and the bolts that hold down the coil packs. So you don't really need this tool, but a flathead screwdriver might come in handy, which you'll see in the installation process. You won't need a flathead screwdriver this big. A regular size flathead should do fine. And last but not least, you'll also need a torque wrench that is capable of torquing down to 10 pound-feet of torque or 120 pound-inches of torque. That is all the tools that will be required for the installation process. So let's go ahead and get on with the actual install process. Since we are going to be messing with electrical components, we first need to remove the battery cover and terminals from the battery posts. Now you probably only need to remove the negative terminal, but I did both negative and positive for good measure. Now we can remove the engine cover. This is where the 8 and 10mm deep sockets will come into play, since the engine cover is held on by 2 nuts and 2 bolts. Once you have those removed, simply pull the engine cover up and set it aside. Next, use your flathead to remove the ring-like structure from the bolt holding down the coil pack by prying it off the threads and move it out of the way. There is one more that must be removed on the coil pack nearest to the firewall. Remove that one the same way. Then loosen the bolts far enough so that the coil pack can be removed. But don't take all of the bolts out, unless you want to, of course. Now I did this by removing one coil pack at a time. Remove the bolt from the first coil pack and pull the coil pack straight up so that it pops out. Next, lower your 5/8 socket and extension so that it fits snug onto the spark plug. At this point, you really want to take your time to prevent messing up any of the threads. Attach your ratchet and remove the spark plug. Again, taking your time is much better, so when you loosen the spark plug, I find it better to loosen the spark plug the rest of the way by hand. Remove the old spark plug, then load the new spark plug into the 5/8 socket and lower it down into its bore. I find it better to twist the spark plug to the left a few times and then to the right to begin threading it. The spark plug should begin moving down into the threads with hardly any resistance. So if you feel resistance early on, loosen the spark plug and try again so that you don't strip the threads. I also find doing this better by hand. Once you feel enough resistance by hand, begin tightening with the ratchet until you feel resistance with the ratchet. Finally, switch your ratchet to the torque wrench and make sure it's set to 10 pound-feet or 120 pound-inches, and tighten the rest of the weight until the torque wrench clicks. Once you have the spark plug torqued down, put the coil pack on and make sure it's properly seated before reinstalling the bolt that holds it in place. Repeat this process for the remaining 3 spark plugs. Also, don't forget to put the ring-like structures back by slipping them over the threads of the bolts that hold the 2 coil packs in place. Now reconnect the battery terminals to their post, but don't reinstall the battery cover or the engine cover just yet. First, let's turn the car on and let it idle for a few minutes to make sure the install went okay. Everything seems to be in working order. Now go ahead and reinstall the engine cover. Lastly, put the battery cover back on, and now let's go for a test drive. Alright, so we're driving in the EcoBoost Mustang with the new spark plugs installed, and I gotta say the car feels noticeably smoother. Even at idle, when I first started it up, the car just seemed to idle much more smooth. And I don't think it was really a placebo kind of effect. I think I can honestly, genuinely say that the car feels more smooth with the new spark plugs installed. So I've driven around 20 plus miles, city, both highway, did a few pulls, and the car feels pretty good. I mean, it doesn't feel much different to the point where there's like some kind of performance gain or anything. Not that that is something that would really be expected, but I mean, it feels good. The car feels a little bit better in terms of, you know, just feeling better, I guess, if that's the way to put it. So why did I decide to change my spark plugs so soon on this car? The reason I decided to change is because the car is now modified, and I plan on eventually getting the car tuned by Tune Plus and hopefully trying to push a little bit more horsepower out of the car. So I figured doing mods kind of like this, more kind of supportive mods, will kind of get the car in a state to be ready to be tuned properly. The reason I decided to go with Brisk Racing plugs is, well, if you go to Tune Plus's website, you see that they got 2 options available. They got NGK Iridium spark plugs and then the Brisk Racing Silver spark plugs. And personally, I probably would have went with the NGK spark plugs just because I've heard of the name in the past and I've bought those spark plugs before. I've never heard of Brisk Racing up until I went into Tune Plus's website, so the reason I didn't go with NGK was because they were on back order until sometime later at the end of the year, so I decided to just try these out. And I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed with them. I like them. Now, Tune Plus recommends them for stock vehicles. It says it on their website. There's a lot of information on these spark plugs on their website. There's a few recommendations when it comes down to installing the plugs. It's where I got the whole 10 foot-pounds to torque these spark plugs down to spec. It also mentions not to use any dielectric grease or anti-seize on the spark plugs, so if you're going to plan on doing that, I mean, you'll see it if you order the spark plugs from Tune Plus, but it's just recommended not to put those during the installation. Overall, it was a pretty easy install, as most spark plugs are. The really only limiting factor, or I guess difficult thing when it comes down to installing spark plugs, is the position they're oriented in. So, I mean, these positions are on top of the engine, very easy to get to, so there was really no problem with space issues or anything like that that made it really difficult to install them. As you saw from the video, it's pretty straightforward. You just remove the engine cover, remove the coil pack, take out the spark plug, replace the spark plug, and do everything else in reverse. Honestly, one of the things that I've really worried about when it comes down to spark plugs is properly gapping them. And so in the past, I've made now I know, but in the past I've made mistakes to the point where I probably knocked off the iridium cap, or I probably, gap spark plugs wrong just because I didn't really know and I just kind of did whatever. And so now I know, I look online and I see what people don't recommend and do recommend, and I see that the habits that I had back then when I would install spark plugs on my previous vehicles, I probably ended up ruining the spark plug, to be honest. But honestly, I'm fine with paying. I don't know if it was a little extra. I know iridium spark plugs and these Brisk Racing spark plugs are a little bit more expensive. So for $45, I think it's pretty cheap, especially to get them pre-gapped to Tune Plus specs. So, I mean, for $45, you can't really beat that. I mean, you get a spark plug that is pre-gapped to a recommended gap by Tune Plus, and it's done for you, very reliably. So I highly recommend it. And I looked at the spark plug gaps, kind of comparing them one by one, and I know it's hard to see a big change, but usually when you buy a 4-pack of spark plugs, as I've noticed from, you know, your local auto parts store that aren't pre-gapped, you can kind of see the inconsistencies in the spark plugs, but with these you couldn't notice it. So I mean, I wouldn't have expect that, you know, because it says they come pre-gapped, so I'm pretty sure they do. And of course, I wasn't going to check the gap myself because I wasn't going to risk ruining the gap in the process of doing that. So overall, I gotta say that these Brisk Racing silver spark plugs that are pre-gapped to Tune Plus specs, I would highly recommend them. I mean, there's nothing bad about them. The car feels great. It, you know, I wouldn't say that it feels any more better in terms of performance, but in terms of kind of idling and the engine just feeling more smooth and more happier, I guess, after all, I would highly recommend them. So we're going to go ahead and end the video here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the installation process as well as a little review on the Brisk Racing spark plugs. If you have any questions or want to leave any feedback, make sure to comment down below. Also, make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for future content because we got more coming for the EcoBoost Mustang. Thanks for watching again. And as always, I'm Steven, out here hanging out, having fun. See you in the next video.